Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley Flores. I'm part of the artist development team at Film Independent. Welcome. This year, we celebrate 30 years of artist development programs. We have been at the forefront of educating, championing, and furthering the careers of filmmakers, just as we are tonight. I'm thrilled to welcome you all to the 2023 Sloan Salon, Storytelling and Tech, Crafting Human-Centered Stories About Technology. We are honored to host this event in partnership with the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, which encourages artists to create more realistic and accurate stories about science and technology, as well as to challenge existing stereotypes about scientists in the media. Film Independent's long-standing collaboration with the Sloan Foundation includes a robust granting program to support qualifying projects. In short, we give out money. This past year, we awarded $120,000 in Sloan grants, spread across our fiction programs, including our episodic lab, our producing lab, fast track, and a distribution grant for finished films. Currently, we're accepting applications for our fast track finance market. Selected projects will pitch up to 60 executives over the course of 3 very intense days. And if you're a Sloan qualifying project, you will be eligible to apply for a $20,000 fast track grant. There's more information on the Film Independent website, and I'll also put a link in our chat. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our incredible moderator today, Wendy Calhoun. A Peabody Award-winning television series writer and producer, Wendy's impressive career has allowed her to explore various realms of storytelling, including one-hour dramas, unscripted series, virtual reality, and gaming. Her drama credits include writing, producing the first season of Fox's Empire and debut seasons for The Rookie Fed, Prodigal Son, Station 19, Nashville, Revenge, and Justified. Without further ado, Wendy Calhoun.
Hello, everybody, and happy Thursday. We're almost there. We're almost at the weekend. I am thrilled to be joining Sloan again, and always my pals at Film Independent. And I've got a great group of people to speak with today. I'm so excited. I get to introduce you just like she introduced me, although I got tired just listening to my own credits. Like, what? Really? I did that? I'm going to start with K. He's going to let me call him K so I don't mispronounce his name. Okay, Kogonada, did I get it right?
Yes. That's perfect.
Yes, Kogonada. Okay, this is an amazing person that you all need to know about. So he's a South Korean-born American filmmaker. He's known for his incredible video essays that analyze the content, form, and structure of various film and television series. The essays frequently use narration and editing as lenses and often highlight a director's aesthetic. Kogonada is a regular Sight and Sound magazine contributor and is frequently commissioned by the Criterion Collection to create supplemental videos for its home video releases. He's also written, directed, and edited 2 feature films, Columbus back in 2017 and After Yang in 2021. Now, After Yang premiered at the Cannes Film Festival, and it stars Colin Farrell and Jodie Turner-Smith, and it follows a family in a sci-fi future, grappling with their unresponsive robotic child. Woo! We're thrilled to have you, Kay. Thanks for being here.
Thanks. Thank you.
Another guest we have today is Lotan. I hope I got that right, Rom. A writer and producer originally from Tel Aviv, who is now living in Los Angeles. You're probably right up the street, right, Rom? He served for over a decade in the Israeli Defense Intelligence, working in the nexus of political, military intelligence, special ops, and international relations, ultimately achieving the rank of major. Should we call you major today?
Why not?
He later worked in the tech startup industry in Tel Aviv. And in his work, Ron brings fresh, diverse, and authentic perspectives based on his unique personal and professional background. Ron graduated with an MFA from USC's prestigious Peter Stark Producing Program. And back in Israel, Ron earned a BSc in Middle Eastern History and Computer Science and an MA in Government and International Relations, for which he completed his thesis with honors and graduated magna cum laude. So that's major magna cum laude. Ram is a Sundeck Episodic Lab 2020 alum and a BAFTA newcomer. He's developed shows for 20th Television Studio with Spotlight Oscar winner Josh Singer, who I worked with. Also with Dope Six, Danny Strong, who I also worked with. And he's got a musical with Ink Factory and Adina Menzel and Chris Brancano and MGM. And let me tell you, he has done his work. In the international space, he's developed several other things with Fremantle and Endemol Shine and Drama Team in Israel, Europe, and Asia. Welcome, Rom. And we have Karim Jerbi. Karim is our scientific specialist here. Keep us on point. He's a professor of psychology at the University of Montreal. He's currently a visiting scholar at the brain imaging group at USC's Ming. How do you say this, Karim? Ming Hsien Institute?
It's the Mingxie Institute, yes.
Mingxie Institute. Sounds lovely. He holds the Canadian Research Chair in Computer, how do I say this? Computational Neuroscience and Cognitive Neuroimaging. What does that mean, Karim?
I have no idea.
Well, he's also the director of the Quebec Neuro AI Research Center, the UNIQUE Center, and he's a member of the Royal Society of Canada's College of New Scholars, Artists, and Scientists. He obtained his PhD in cognitive neuroscience and brain imaging from the Pierre and Marie Curie University in Paris and a biomedical engineering degree from Germany's University of Karlsruhe. His research lies at the crossroads of neuroscience and artificial intelligence. The multidisciplinary research conducted in his laboratory seeks to unpack the complex brain dynamics that mediate higher order cognitive processes. Woo, that's a mouthful. That's decision-making and creativity and various states of consciousness. Think about sleeping, dreaming, anesthesia, meditation, psychedelic states, I should say. He's also keenly interested in the convergence between neuroscience, AI, and art. Thanks for joining us, Karim. Wow. I am so curious from all three of you. Was there anything in your earliest memories that sparked your interest in storytelling, creativity, and tech?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of. Well, it's funny because filmmaking itself is the incorporation. It's such a technological medium, and I remember. This is a weird way of talking about it, but I remember being so afraid of certain movies, and it would just haunt me. And I remember my father talking, telling me that I don't need to be scared because whatever image that I'm thinking about that's haunting me, on the other side of it was a camera. That he wanted me to imagine this whole crew on the other side. He wasn't a filmmaker or anything, but he just understood the kind of the deconstruction of a film. And so that relationship between this emotional fear that I was having and this technology that was capturing it and reproducing it was something that I was kind of work through to try to not be so afraid, and it certainly kind of made me realize that this medium itself was technological. But then, I remember when I was a bit older, I read two books like Marshall McLuhan, when he said the medium is the message or the massage, it was the first time I thought, wow, it's not just content, but it's the technology that shapes us. We don't just use technology, but technology can alter us in society. And then The Brave New World. This is not so early on, but I thought that story always felt really profound because in this case, technology wasn't such a explicit. It wasn't just about controlling, but it was through pleasure, through other things that seem innocent, that we were kind of falling into a certain kind of, again, being shaped by it in ways that wasn't so, explicit or obvious.
Well, did you have any early moments that triggered your interest in this arena?
Yeah, I think, just to frame this conversation, tech, I feel like in film and TV, usually it's sci-fi, and science fiction, and it's advanced tech that is beyond what exists, sometimes to heighten the message or, discuss some kind of topic, whether it's 1984, Brave New World, or all these things, right? And obviously, I loved sci-fi since I was a young, kid, and was always into it. I think what's really interesting about Sloan, just to give context to people who don't know, that it kind of pushes for grounded and realistic, tech and science in film and TV. So obviously, I have like very early sci-fi, Blade Runner comes to mind, or The Matrix, and all these stuff. But I think what really like lit my fuse when I was writing, and it's probably The Imitation Game, the Alan Turing movie that is actually backed by Sloan as well, I think. So, seeing a story that is all grounded in reality, the science, existed at the time, nothing was, now it's a weird time because it seems like we do live in the future and robots deliver food and, the AI, tsunami and everything. But I think for me, it was The Imitation Game. It also took, a beautiful mind as well. I think they both did such a, woven such a personal thread when it came to the science of everything. And we'll talk about that more soon, I'm sure. But and also, the story of this gay individual as a gay guy myself, like how different the times have changed. And I think tech as a monument is just, it's just really interesting, the angle the movie took. So I think that is for me.
Yeah, I want to massage this question a little bit for you, Karim, because obviously we're the storyteller group, but you're the scientist. I'll say for me, I keep going back to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I think that story for me I know that's not quote unquote the kind of tech we may want to put under tech, but to me it was man's creation of science, and then that science somehow taking on a life of its own. For you as a scientist, when did you start to become interested in studying art and looking at that as a part of the research and work that you do?
That's a great question. I'm not quite sure when that started, but I'd say that as a kid, I was also super excited about science fiction, both for the fiction of it, but also a lot for the science. So I remember, for example, as a kid, I think at the age of 10, my dream was to build this machine that would allow us to watch our dreams real time as they unfold. So you could connect somebody's brain to this machine, and they would be asleep, and then you'd be able to watch their dreams in real time. And so it's funny now that 30 years or more later, I'm seeing things in science are getting us really close to doing what we call brain decoding. In other words, recording brain signals, running machine learning algorithms onto them to try and decode the content of the thought, the brain activations that relate to different activations in the brain, reflecting different aspects of cognition, of emotion, of memory, and things like that. So again, more globally, what I'm seeing is that this, what we used to call science fiction, a lot of it now is becoming so much closer to reality, and this is specifically the case for AI. So that's why, and this is part of our research, is combining neuroscience and AI, and we're seeing these large leaps forward with AI, where anything that maybe you would have considered maybe a science fiction movie maybe just 5 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, today is sort of like a reality show, right? It's something that already exists and the technology is already there. So it begs the question of what is the definition of science fiction now, specifically when it comes to AI, and what are the next steps going to be? But it also means that even these types of narrations are holding a mirror towards us. And this is what we see is I feel, at least in science, when we're trying to understand the brain, we're trying to use machine learning to better understand the brain, or we're trying to understand, take knowledge from neuroscience to build better machine learning algorithms. It's like a two-way, let's say, cooperation between, or collaboration between, these two fields of neuroscience and AI, trying to help each other out. The more we do that, the more we start talking about things like cognition in machines, consciousness in machines, and things like this. And so when we do that, or creativity in machines, are machines able to be creative? When we start asking these questions, we start to realize that our definitions of these things are not really quite clear to us. What does it mean to be conscious? What does it mean really truly to be creative? How do we define that? Now that can a machine have it? And so people say, well, if you're asking, well, define it first. Or if you're saying, can a machine become conscious? Well, let's define what consciousness is. And that's where we realize we have a very loose definition of all of these things. We thought we knew, but now this technology is is pushing us. So it's like holding a mirror towards us, where we're now self-reflecting on these things. And I think there's a lot of these things that are going to make their way into storytelling and filmmaking more and more. I'm not sure this answers your initial question, but this is sort of what I feel very excited about these days.
Well, I love that analogy of holding a mirror, because that is, to me, is very much a clear definition of what we as storytellers do, right? Holding up a mirror to ourselves and to society and to the things that we want to reflect in the art. And I'm so curious, though, because when you think about technology, what we have up until now, and I agree with you, we are moving into a new era that's going to require a new level of vision for us as filmmakers, as creators, as storytellers. But when we think about technology, very often the tech is presented as the antagonist. The tech is presented as the monster, right? Frankenstein. The tech is presented to us as the thing we should fear. And there's a lot of that now. You know, you can hear a lot of that about AI in the media. You know, it's being portrayed as this thing that we must somehow harness. And yet we feel the genie's out of the bottle. So I'm curious from the storytellers here, you know, first of all, what do you think about the fact that our mirror is reflecting our idea of tech as the big bad? And also, are there other ways that the reflection of tech could be infused in story?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting is, you know, I've been engaging in a lot of Asian and Eastern sci-fi, which has a really fundamentally different kind of relationship to, let's say, AI. And in my own film too, and it's funny because I didn't think about it in relationship to other Asian literature, but my instinct was not to feel the other as a threat, but to kind of have empathy. And then, you know, as I was reading more Asian sci-fi, that tends to be the where storytelling happens, and it's about a kind of empathy towards this other being. And it did really make me think that, you know, let's say in a dominant you know, white male narrative, other, traditionally anything that's other is vilified, is a threat, you know, whether it's a foreign person, whether it's some gender, you know, there's just been a real history of like treating otherness as an immediate threat to whatever is dominant. So what's interesting to me is I just read, it's another beautiful Asian piece of sci-fi, and it was all about the sort of the empathy, trying to understand the other and trying to understand elements of it. So I think as we have other voices in the narrative of sci-fi and AI, we may not find that our immediate reaction is, hey, if it's other, it's a threat to our existence. You know, I think people who are used to being other, you know, their reaction is not to just continue to other anything. You know, they can almost relate to that a bit. And I know with After Yang, you know, when I saw that it was like this Asian robot, and I know like even being Asian feels like a construct to me, and I struggle with what that even means. You know, my immediate desire in adapting it was not to present this Asian robot as a threat, but to try to understand how he's trying to find meaning, you know, and the emotional element. And that emotional part of AI is more interesting to me than, and there's some real, you know, I think there are real big questions we have to ask about it. But I you know, for me, it's not like that I immediately see otherness as a threat to my existence, you know.
Yeah, it's I think it really stems from, you know, the person's perspective. Like obviously we're all biased, and I think that is inherent to the AI discussion. I don't know. I mean, I think tech, I think I take a little bit more philosophical, you know, I wouldn't say agnostic, but a, you know, sort of asking questions approach to it. Tech, I think in general, like any other tool, isn't bad or good in and of itself, right? It's how people harness it, use it, right? It's like the same with the atom bomb. It's the same with a knife. It's the same with AI, right? So it's like, is it good? Is it bad? Or like who's behind it? Who controls it, and for what purpose? And I think the main thing I sort of wanted to do with my script is sort of like there's this thing that is happening, right? And that was 4 years ago. And since then, there was such a massive explosion when it comes to AI with ChatGPT and everything. But like there's this thing that's happening, and the public is not a part of the discussion, right? So now you all know that, like, wait, what is the material that, the algorithms study from? And is it, predominantly like male and white literature or coding? And right. And so we have that thing. And also, how do we even design the teaching and, all these kind of stuff that will, determine what the tool will ultimately look like. And then as a result, like what it's going to be used for, right? It can be autonomous drones that are going to decide by themselves if they're going to take a shot or not at, some hangar somewhere in the Middle East. And it can be, a machine that automatically decides to, like in hospitals. And so it's really like questions that have such significant impacts on our lives that I think what Karim said about them, like what is morality and how do we code morality? And then like what is good and what is bad are such big questions. And I think it's really interesting what Kogonada said about Eastern perspective versus Western perspective, and nationalities and all these sort of layers that we have as people. So agreeing on like a one sort of canon, good or good, it's going to be hard. But so I think just like representation would need to have all the variants of, tech being good and bad and, neutral and whatnot. So I don't know, that's some random thoughts on them.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say one thing that I've sort of noticed lately, because I can't agree with you more, Karim. Like, I feel like where we're at now is the visions of yesterday have all caught up to us, and we must start looking towards the next visions. And I feel it requires us to dream, and I'm not quite sure AI has yet learned to dream. I think that might be still a fairly human experience. But I have noticed in more stories lately, AI being a inciting incident, if you will, or I won't say AI, I'll say tech being an inciting incident in the story versus just the enemy, right? Meaning, example I can think of is Swarm. In the show Swarm, I don't know if you've seen it. It's a new series that's out, but basically a young woman has a traumatic event in her life, and she's connected to this social media that is sort of spurring her character, spurring her to make choices that I'm not sure she would have made without that connection. And I am curious to talk a little bit about how tech, and I'm talking about everyday tech, the tech we carry around in our hand, in our pocket, that connects us all. It has done some very positive things for people who weren't heard, who weren't seen, who were othered, and brought them into the part of social discourse that they weren't in before, because I think some gatekeepers may have kept them and their stories from being heard. Do you ever think about those kinds of things, like how you incorporate tech into your work, into your thoughts, and the connectivity, and how that can be something as part of the artistic expression?
Yeah, I mean, I think I do think like the everyday kind of tech that you're talking about, that we begin to incorporate. And, I think new tech is always a thing that feels scary, right? But new tech eventually becomes old tech, and then it just feels like nothing. And I do think when it kind of falls into nothing, it's when it's most pervasive, because we're not like, and I don't want to be naive about AI and new tech, because I do think it's incredibly complicated and there are all these iterations of it. But I do, think it is, there is this essay I read a long time ago called the Cyborg Manifesto, but, that we are already all cyborgs, right? Like we have glass, we've been using tech to augment our reality constantly. We're wearing glasses, we take pills that augment our bodies. And so we have always kind of been people who've incorporated tech in our lives. And so, yeah, but I mean, to talk about like these forms of communication that now that they're in everyday use have really exploded and opened up possibilities and representation and voices that, you know, otherwise wouldn't be heard. If I could just quickly throw in one other thing, because it's, I do remember this old movie called The Gods Must Be Crazy. Have anyone seen that?
Yes.
Right. And that, I think, is such a perfect iteration, like talking about, it's just a Coke bottle that falls from a plane and goes into a tribe, you know, an African tribe, and it radically changes that, you know, society. Like that one Coke bottle dropped into the society. And we would never say like a Coke bottle is evil. We would never say, oh, you know, but it just like in the way in which, you know, new tech will alter the way society functions and changes power structure and changes, you know, relationships, regardless of what it is. And this is kind of the part of society. This is, we've always had to deal with the way technology changes relationships and power structures and you know, and for good or bad. Yeah.
Maybe if I can jump in, there's related to this idea of AI not always being on the negative side of things and actually maybe being contributing positively. There's been a lot of discussions, as you all know, recently about the role of AI and things like large language models like GPT in the field of creativity. And there's a lot of debate. People say, well, AI should not be used to replace human creativity, and others saying, well, AI could be considered creative. And so there's like these two ideas, but in the middle, there's also a third way of thinking, well, there might be also new routes of co-construction on co-creativity between humans and machines, synergistic approaches. In other words, there's not a question about humans, machines replacing humans in terms of creativity, nor us wanting to entirely keep AI out of the equation when it comes to being creative, but that there might be, and this goes back to also what Kay was saying. We've always incorporated technology in different ways and in different levels into our lives and into our professions. So I think there's an increasing this idea that, for example, within the creative process that starts often with a divergent process where you're having a lot of ideas and a lot of different options to think about, be it in painting, writing, or any other type of or music creation. And then there's a convergent phase where you have to select among all of the ideas what works best with your vision, with your idea, or what's expected from you, and you try to deliver something that makes sense. In the first phase, which is the divergent component, there is an increasing interest in exploring the use of AI, like in generating images or generating text or generating ideas that then serve as a basis for fine-tuning, tweaking, changing. Oh no, I like this, but I don't like this. How about we change this? And then, so you incorporate that into the process. And then for the convergence part, we'll see how much AI can help, but that's, for now, I think remains way more, relies a lot more on like human intervention. But it seems that there might be a third way, which is like a positive way of seeing things, which is synergy between humans and machines when it comes to creative processes. I just wanted to like highlight that other option.
In that context, Wendy, I think it's you know, obvious, but it's also really interesting time to have this conversation, especially, you know, during the WGA strike and the AI being one of the hot topics about it. And, you know, we ask ourselves, like, is it the most crucial, you know, part of the discussion? And, you know, that could be a part of not necessarily foreseeing you know, that obviously open to interpretation, but just because of what Karim said, it's, you know, kind of had to be said.
Yeah. Hey, I think we could solve the WGA crisis right now. I think this panel should. No, I'm joking.
I just declare my writing partner a robot. Karim, okay, this one, I just have to ask you this directly. Okay, give us a little secret. In your research and in your work right now, what are you coming across where you're going, why is nobody making a film about this? Why is nobody telling this story? What new pockets of information are you finding that could spur some storytelling?
Well, I don't know so much about storytelling, but I can say one of the things that we're looking at right now, which relates to the topics that we're discussing, is trying to explore two cognitive processes. One is consciousness, and the other one is creativity, both in human brains and in machines. Artificial networks on one hand and biological networks on the other. And so, for example, asking the question, if we use tests of creativity, like creativity scores. There are many tests that can be used to test human creativity. Can we apply some of them to large language models like GPT? And then how well do they score on those tests? And how fast are large language models improving in terms of creativity? Are they close to human creativity in terms of these scores? Again, it doesn't mean that it encompasses all of what we consider to be creative, but on these specific benchmarks, because now when they release these large language models like GPT, they tell us how well they fare on SAT tests, on the bar exam, on medical license and things like this, but they're not really looking at other cognition-related tests such as the creativity test. And so we've been doing some of this, and some of the results are quite surprising. We'll be publishing on some of these soon. But again, what I'm finding most exciting is so for example, if you do see performances in machines that rival or even surpass human level of creativity in terms of like writing, or we've been playing around with haikus, these are Japanese poems that we're asking machines to write, and we're testing how well they fare on that. The question again is, what is the creative process? And if we go back to the term art, which you mentioned, Wendy, at the very beginning, what is it about art that I'm most interested in? Is it the output as somebody that looks at it and thinks, well, this poem talks to me. I don't care if it's a machine or if it's a human, but actually just reading it makes me feel something? Or do I need to know why, who wrote this, what context, what's the background, and then that's what's going to make an impact on me? And this might differ between people. I've spoken with some of my students. Some of them are quite radical in the sense, I don't care if it's a machine or a human. If I read those lines of poems and it makes me feel something, that's all I care about. And I have other people that I talk to who say, no, for me, any object of art, it's like the whole process, why it came to be. And so, again, I'm not answering exactly your question, but I think this is very much sort of something that where these fields now are meeting. So AI, neuroscience, or cognitive science in particular, cognitive neuroscience, and the creative industry are like sort of crossing paths now because they're asking similar questions, but with different tools.
That's fascinating. I mean, you're taking me back to what you were saying earlier, Kay, which is like, I mean, you could look at film itself as technology, right?
Mm-hmm.
The medium itself that we deliver the stories on is technology. So,
Yeah.
you know, where do you draw the line to say what it is that is, you know, that can evoke emotion? And how does tech play within that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's really fascinating. Well, first of all, just to respond to that, because it's really interesting that because AI, the creation of AI is art itself, right? Because that's what artists have been doing forever, is trying to, you know, like a sculpture, and they're trying to replicate what a human form looks like. So we're always creating the mirror. Like one might even define art as the ultimate pursuit of like mirroring reality. And so you have self-portraits, you have sculpture that takes the exact human form. And in some ways, the idea that we as human beings can create the act of creation, you know, or really like replicate human beings at such a level that that this form itself can create. I mean, my mind is just starting to, you know, like get around that. But emotionally, I think what's really interesting to me is that we as human beings are always entangle ourselves emotionally with objects. You know, I have been raising kids, and they can fall in love with a blanket, you know, and when they lose the blanket, they will be emotionally affected by it. Or you can feel that way with a car or a sports team. Like we are constantly feeling emotional about things that are not necessarily animate. What's interesting to me about as technology gets more sophisticated is how complicated that emotional entanglement is going to be, right? And there's real potential feelings of loss because, again, even the simplest things we can feel affectionate towards. And, you know, Roger Ebert used to call cinema, going back to your question, the great empathy machine, that this machine creates empathy and emotion. So it does feel like there's this incredible intersection right now that is happening between technology and our medium of storytelling, and just the way in which our human beings have more possibility of being entangled emotionally, for better or for worse, in tech itself. And we all often think of tech as something cold and distant, but I think we are daily engaging. I can look at my son and see him looking at the screen and just smiling, like responding and having just this kind of emotion towards it. So it is like, I think emotion is at the heart of our future. I think we ought not to divorce it and just think of it rationally. I think we have to ask these big questions about how we will be emotionally entangled, with tech.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Ron, but before I forget this, they talk about the dopamine hits that we get, just in looking at, our social media feeds, and I am curious, I'll come back to you, Karim, about any kind of studies you find and the brain's reaction to technology, and how does the brain, how does it translate technology? Does it translate it in the same way that it translates human to human interaction? I'm curious. But first, Ron, we have a question from the audience. And it basically is about the Sloan grant, because you received a Sloan grant, am I right? For your work. So the question is, how loose is this idea that your piece has to have technology in it to qualify for that? But I actually want to know more from you about, which came first? Did you hear about the grant and thought, I want to write a piece about technology? Or were you already working on a piece about technology? Oh, this is the perfect thing for me.
Yeah, it happened kind of at the same time. I think that would be also kind of my answer to your question about how to evoke emotion when it comes to tech in storytelling. I think, maybe I'm a bit contrarian on this in this panel, but we're attached to our phones, we look at them, but we get those reactions from other people that are at their phones, right? It's not the tech in it of itself. The tech is sort of, right, it's the ghost in the machine. It's not the machine. I think for me, what was really interesting in the script, I was like, okay, I always, character first. So I think one way to evoke emotion when it comes to tech is like, how do we take what the tech does and we find a paradox that is interesting with a character that sort of had to kind of like butt heads with, the profession. And I specifically, it was one of the first scripts I wrote. And I think I just moved from Israel to the US. And obviously, I had my own like notions and guilt, or like leaving home and leaving my family, and sort of always gaining distance is always an opportunity to sort of like revisit what you've done. And I feel like, what if a guy that has a really checkered, morally ambiguous past is the best person to, program the human soul or morality or judgment, right? Like, and that immediately creates like, wait, who made you, be the person who writes this? And also, how would you? And it's sort of an interesting debate now. It's like, wait, is the people, is the one who committed, are the sinful people know what the meaning of sin the most, right? Or is it people that have to be completely righteous that, should sort of like light that path? And it touches immediately. I think when we talk about creativity and, and AI and stuff, we'll get it, just what Kogonada said about statue, right? Like this is, it gets to the realm of religion and God, and we all have our perspective, but it's sort of what we're trying to do, right? And in Judaism, one of the 10 commandments is like, you cannot create an image or try to create the image or shape of God. And then if human beings are, sort of an emulation of God, then does AI is that as well, right? So I think paradoxes are always interesting in characters, right? Like, what if a misanthrope like House treats people, right? Like immediately it's like, and I think it's the same with tech. If you find like a really piece of, I don't know, like a marine biologist that hates the sea, but it's immediately like, oh, now it's interesting. And the other thing I'll say, I think an Arrival did it perfectly, right? Like, if the tech can be a metaphor for something, because Arrival is actually based on the feminist theory, which essentially says like, when you don't have language for something, when you don't know what something is called, you cannot define it. But immediately, once you know that, like, oh, this is, like just even creating the concept of feminism. Now it's like, oh, we understand that there's a new power structure in society that we didn't know of before. In Arrival, the whole point, and sorry if I'm spoiling it for someone, the minute she understood their language, the aliens' language, now she can suddenly speak with them because her mind is expanded. So I think tech, either if it's an interesting paradox or a metaphor that can sort of like, it's like, great, now I'm sort of in a philosophical clash within myself about what is right. But yes, you have to have grounded tech in the script. You work with advisors that to make you to like people like Karim. I had a great advisor from Duke University, Professor Vincent Konitzer, who's also like an AI thought leader. And it's fun because, constraints can kind of actually be very fruitful for creativity.
Oh, you reminded me of a story from my own life there. I mean, I'm taking away a lot from this. First of all, the idea of the mirror as something that we can use as a metaphor to help us in our creative crafting story with tech. But also, like you're saying, there's other things. I'll tell you a quick story. I was a development executive before I became a writer. And the last show that I worked on was a feature film, and it was called The Matrix. And I had a simple task on The Matrix. The company I worked for was called Village Roadshow Pictures, and they had to decide if they were going to invest $40 million in that film. And if you read the script, it really had a tough time making sense of it. Like on paper, it was difficult. But luckily, the Wachowskis sent over to our offices all of their storyboards. And so I spent an entire weekend of my life going through every single frame, every single storyboard. And I wrote up a 5-page document that went to the investors to say, here's why we should invest in this film. And the only thing I could come up with to compare The Matrix to was God. Mm-hmm. And so in using that metaphor, I had to figure out some way to take this concept that feels strange and odd and it doesn't make sense and put it to a level that could reach, anybody on the planet. How do you do that? And taking those broad ideas, those themes and fusing it is very helpful. So back to you, Karim, and actually, we're going to be wrapping up pretty soon, but I do want to make sure everybody gets a chance to talk about this as well. Again, some of the things you may have discovered in your studies about brains and our reactions to technology. Is technology just a barrier? As Ron's saying, is it just a thing in between? Are we really just reacting to what we're seeing or what's being delivered on the other side? Or is there something to our interface with technology? The first part of the question.
Yeah, so I hope the disappointment is not going to be too big because actually we are in the lab. We don't do research on the specific question of like how we react to technology per se. So I don't have any data on that, and I know some people will just come up with wild claims pulled out of nowhere. But so I will, from a scientific perspective, I won't be able to say much about that. But for sure, our brains are always trying to are prediction machines and also reward-seeking machines. So we try to find patterns all the time. That's the way we're wired. The brain is wired to try to identify patterns. That's also why machine intelligence or machine learning is using a lot this idea of identifying patterns as how it functions and how it learns. But we're also seeking reward all the time, and so this is why we can get stuck in the loops of where we try to do on a short, with minimal effort, something that's going to give us maximum reward. And if that works, we're going to stay at it. And even in some cases, there have been experiments done, I think, with mice showing that the mouse will keep on tapping the button for dopamine until it actually dies, just because there's this. So it's like a form of it's like a model of addiction in a way that shows you if you're getting that reward, you can get stuck into a loop of wanting that. So this is also why we should probably, I know technology is an important component of this discussion, but we should also think of life without technology. And that's probably good for us to be sane, but it's also probably also good for the storytelling and narration where that we need a sort of a balance of all of these things. And I think for us to thrive, we need to be careful of the negative impact of having technology be such a central part of our lives. I'm probably stating the obvious here, but I think it's just important to keep like this perspective of I think the way we are wired to get, again, to go back to the neuroscience side of things, we could easily fall into the trap of if the tools we have through AI and the applications we have and social media allow us to get this constant reward, it's going to be very easy for people to get trapped into behaviors that ultimately are not good for them, just because it gives us immediate rewards, but actually going out for a walk or like leaving my phone alone for like a day or two might give me more reward. But I will only realize that after 2 days or after a 10-day retreat of meditation. But it's only after that time that I will realize all the good that it's doing. But tech and some of these apps and social media in particular have this peculiarity of being able to give us reward in a very short period and like in a very short lapse. So yeah, there might be a risk there from a cognitive perspective.
Well, that's interesting. We have a question that's coming in, and it's for the filmmakers, but I want to ask you this too. Everyone's interested. What are you working on next? What, are there any theories that you've got going on that you're working on that you don't mind sharing with us, or any research that you're doing right now that you're excited about that you don't mind sharing with us? I mean, we don't expect you to have the answer to. We're just curious about what playground you're playing in.
Is this a question to me?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Well, I'll happily answer that. Obviously, I won't tell you any secrets. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, come on.
So we're looking at several things. I'd say first, at the intersection of science and art, we are looking at how we can use generative AI to enhance the performance or the way we perceive. Let's say, for example, I'm just going to make this very, but we are able now, this is amazing work that great students in my lab have been doing over the last months. So shout out, I don't know if Antoine or Philippe or Jan are following us, but if they are, just want to shout out to them. They've been doing amazing work where we record brain signals, use those, we try to identify patterns using machine learning in those brain signals, and then use those features to, in real time, change either sound, so you can create music that is actually changed by the way your brain is changing in real time. And in some cases, we've tried this with short snippets of movies. So you can be watching a movie, but you can actually use generative AI to create different moods. So the same movie will be rendered differently based on how your brain is. In other words, you could, like, in the long term, you could switch on to a movie, and then depending on, you put on your headset, and based on how you're feeling on that day, the movie will not be the same. If you watch it 2 days later, the movie will be different. So sort of like an interactive way of experiencing movies. Or you can just remove the headset and just look at the movie the way it was intended for you to be watched. But this is something where we're seeing some of examples of this being actually possible. So that's at the frontiers of. But on the other aspects, I mean, we're working on things like looking at brain dynamics and brain complexity and how they change across different states of consciousness, including under psychedelics or anesthesia. To try and better understand consciousness, we look at unconsciousness. So what happens when the brain shuts down, or when you go to sleep, or different sleep stages, or what happens in the brain when you're dreaming, and how does that compare, for example, to hallucinations under psychedelics and things like this. And there are metrics such as brain complexity and a framework called brain criticality, which I won't have time to delve into now today, but provides a very promising framework to try and probe these questions and allow us a better understanding of what's happening in the brain when we are in different states. This can then be extended to also artificial intelligence, because more and more researchers in computer science are interested in importing knowledge from cognitive neuroscience to try and endow machines with some of these capacities. So how can we allow machines to have more, for example, mechanisms of attention, or mechanisms of better memory, or emotions? Can we, if we have a better grip on how brain dynamics operates in different forms of emotions or expressions of emotions, can we build models similar to that can get integrated into artificial neural networks? And if we do, is that going to make these, for example, ChatGPT have more empathy, or will it make it more intelligent? Just because there's this whole debate of, intelligence is not just simply rational intelligence, there's emotional intelligence. So these are some of the questions that we are looking into right now and that I'm particularly excited about.
Well, that sounds fascinating. Kay, what are you working on? What's coming up next?
It's fascinating. Well, I love this conversation. I love, by the way, the reference of arrival, which is, so like language as something so fundamentally, like language is this sort of invention that is coursing through our brain and shaping us. And we don't often think of that as a technology, but it is one of the most pervasive. And I think that's why we're so startled by ChatGPT, because it's like exploring the fundamental tech of all human life, which is language. And then I love this idea of like going back to creation, and in the beginning was the word, right? With like this, and this whole storytelling that we're constantly doing, kind of getting to what is the meaning of this life, and that I think is where emotion lives, the stakes live, because we're all alive right now. We know that it's not forever, and we're trying to figure out what does this all mean. Anyway, in my own work, I have a film that I've been working on that I can't say too much about it, but it's a bit romantic, comedic, a little bit tragic, but it's fundamentally about, also thematically about truth and artifice, and truth in artifice, the relationship between the two. And then some larger project that is kind of in the same territory of After Yang, but at a bigger scale. And it's fundamentally, and it's very integrating. It takes place in the future. And it is about how a future tech is going to affect our sense of loss, our sense of family, our sense of identity. And so that is, that's kind of at the beginning stages of exploring that.
What about you, Ron? What's next?
I'm thinking about how do you write the script for that movie that changes as you go? Like, how would you, then how the binary trees look like for that? I'm hoping for the strike to end as soon as possible. So please, AMPTP, come back to negotiate with us. I am actually working on a new tech-driven project, but it's very grounded. It's not sci-fi at all, because by the way, I think obviously it's a hot topic, AI, but it's to say that Sloan backed Hidden Figures, right, which takes place in NASA about Black women in the 60s, right? Like it's all the first female firefighters and or flight. I don't know, can't remember exactly, but I'm just saying it's a wide gamut of what science is, and doesn't have to always like look ahead. Sometimes it can look past at the past and at our time, right? Like I come from an espionage background. I write a lot of like political spy thrillers. I think tech there is playing a massive part, and the whole idea of truth and online and what is then true or not, and especially now with deep fakes and all these things, we kind of are living in the future already. So these are things that I think about a lot. Just kind of like Kogonada, like truth, truth within the web of lies, privacy, if it exists still. So these are the kind of projects that I'm cooking now.
My takeaway right now is that we have this definition of tech, which I think right now is all about ones and zeros to some degree, but we're talking about tech as being something way bigger than that. I've heard spiritualists talk about mushrooms, psychedelic, the magic mushrooms, as having their own technology, right? So it's really interesting. I think we're going to have to, as we move forward, and I'd love to hear your opinion, maybe redefine what is tech. What really is tech to us? Does tech have to be something that's plugged in, or is it a much broader landscape?
Maybe one quick comment to that. I really like what Kay said about language being technology, or one of the core technologies. And in that sense, it's because language is so fundamental to communication and also to understanding and to defining concepts and to interaction. So again, I think, to me at least, technology at the end of the day is a tool. And so it can have various forms. And it's a tool that allows us to achieve things, beyond what we can just do with our bodies. So I think it's probably a very wide definition of what technology is. And of course, AI is one of the terms that we're talking about a lot today, which is one of the facets of technology. But robotics, VR are other forms of technologies, but also medical equipment, anything, I guess. And all of these play such an important part, like our phones and everything, that's all the gadgets that surround us. But I really like the idea of going even beyond that, and to Kate's point, like language should be considered also, I think, where technology is not in the traditional sense, but I think as a tool that enables us to do a lot of things, it has evolved to help us in that sense. So that's my point.
Yeah, I think tech. You're right. Like, that's a great point, and it is such a broad. I mean, I think it's a really interesting time in history that the first time, there was this clarion call to stop maybe rushing developing AI algorithms before we understand how exactly and what are we doing, and what governance should sort of like oversee that. I think that's the first time this discussion has been, and I think it's a really interesting serendipitous moment of time that Oppenheimer is about to come out, right? And like the idea of the atom bomb is sort of kind of echoing to this modern times. Like, I think just because we can doesn't mean we have to, and also like why are we doing what we do? Just as a closing comment, I think I am always still interested in the personal element of tech, and I think I think scientists should be more in the forefront of film and TV. Film executives, screenwriters, we're very like old school. Most of us, we're afraid of, I worked with a director that, he's like, yeah, I don't want like NSA and computer stuff because that doesn't shoot well. Like, can we do Cold War, dropping points? And like, yeah, nobody does that anymore. But so I think, it's kind of behooves us younger generations that are not afraid from computers and tech, like, to understand how we communicate that to a wider audience so they will be a part of the conversation, because it touches, like, it is relevant for us all. So that is my thought.
Yeah, I'd like to say, because of Sloan, and they helped after Yang, or we got an award from them, and I think it's such an important. It's important in this way that the history of art was kind of rooted in religion, and art kind of serving their narratives. But science needs narratives, right? I mean, I'm a real believer in science, and it can often feel cold. But I think right now in our modern world, we need to understand it in relationship to its meaningfulness, and I'm really grateful that there is this sort of organization that is kind of having art intersect the meanings that they are discovering and trying to incorporate it into society. And so it's a really important moment for that too, for art to have give science the meaning and complexity that it deserves. Yeah.
I agree. I mean, as a writer and a storyteller, I know that right now I'm obsessed with something you mentioned, Karim, which is the unconscious mind, specifically the unconscious mind of a Black woman, and putting that on screen and letting you feel what that feels like, and we talk about the empathy machine and all the other references we've had, but, there's probably a way to do that. Well, there's many ways to do that story. But I would imagine there's a great way to do it that has a level of that could be a therapy 50 years from now. You know what I mean? And what would that look like? And, who developed that technology? And who would like to shut that technology down? That would be, fascinating, at least.
Yeah, I would love to see that as well. And I think just what Karim said earlier, like, we exploring the consciousness by understanding what is unconsciousness, immediately like, oh, there's a story there. Like, you feel it. So I think those are the sort of this is where I think the narrative should come from. I totally agree with you.
Yes. But I mean, what you said earlier too has a lot of validity. I mean, Hidden Figures is a great example. And I'm on the board of the Gina Davis Institute, and that we use that example all the time, because if she can see it, she can be it. The logo of the whole institute for women, especially to see women working in science. There's just so many stories that have yet to be told in our history that we do need to document in our for our future, to see that there is a space for us in science and technology, meaning women and people of color specifically. And I think we do need that encouragement of those older narratives too, to let people know, hey, guess what? You were there. You know, your ancestry was there.
Can I say something quickly? I think to your point, Wendy, AI is also going to be a very nice medium for storytelling, specific to the question of injustices and discrimination and exclusion, partly because that's in the DNA, unfortunately, of current AI. AI currently, so for example, when we develop algorithms, people always say garbage in, garbage out. If you're using garbage data, your algorithm is not going to work properly. But it's also bias in, bias out. So if you're using biased data to train your algorithms are biased. And so AI, and unfortunately, the state of AI today has a lot of injustices embedded in its training, in its DNA. It has a lot of discrimination that is embedded in there, and at all levels and all forms. And so it is, for like a science fiction or for a futuristic type narration that wants to explore the question and wants to expose injustices and discrimination and racism. I think AI is also a tool that would be great for that, to tell that story in a way that's going to engage also the younger generations who are going to be, who might resonate more with like an AI agent or like an AI persona created. So like CGI graphic, these generations of personas with AI that has learned from the data that humanity has created. It's I think also a very interesting way of telling these stories, and there's a lot that can be done with that, I think. I think you're muted.
I know this is
a
really
evil
personal question. But how can you talked about deep fakes. You mentioned the deep fake, and yes, this is a fear that we don't know the truth from you know, the lies from the fakes anymore, that the lines there is going to be blurred. Is there any way that we can become more conscious of how technology impacts our psyche, and how to sort of like, how do we find the truth? You know, what are the things that we can do in our thinking to help us get there? Is there any?
I think it's true as well to a headline in every news outlet, and then is it it's the fake news discussion, and then it becomes very political very quickly. I think we all need to be better look at the news we consume, the information we consume. It's just like AI. Like AI is us because we code it, right? Like it's what do we feed it? What do we feed ourselves? And it sort of goes back to the the good versus bad, right? There's going to be tech that creates deep fake. There is tech that can detect now deep fake, which is going to be like the good sheriff and the white hat, and like it's going to be crucial to our existence. But they teach in the Scandinavian kids at age 7 to sort of like discern their what information they consume and how to check facts online, right? Like we don't talk about it a lot in in this country, in Israel, where I'm from. It's because political discourse is much more heated, and it's easy to to go to the most sort of superficial level. But I share your concerns. That's
Right. I mean, yeah. I mean, I have a 16-year-old daughter who loves TikTok, and it's a topic of discussion that comes up all the time, because those algorithms are very, very strong, right? They're there to please you, to get those dopamine hits, keep you engaged, keep you on there. But it's also so much tied to our capitalist system here, right? And I've heard from someone who's a part of Sloan, I'm not going to say any names, but that even in China, that there are different regulations for TikTok and the type of algorithms that can be used for children that don't necessarily direct them in the same way that we're a little more free-willing here. And I don't know that that's good, you know? So I think about those things. I don't know if you do as a father, Kay, you know, watching your children engaging and wondering, you know, if you don't know what safeguards to put up because you don't know what they, you know, what they're consuming really.
Yeah. Or if, you know, if reality or everyday life can compete with this dopamine, you know, it is really like it alters your taste, right? So I love apples. You know, I've always, my parents used to buy me like basket of apples because I'm almost addicted to them. But, you know, if I'm like just eating chocolate, you know, and then I eat an apple, and like apple tastes like really bland to me, right? Because it's like, oh, you know, so it's like you can, you know, I do worry that certain things that feel meaningful in life, whether it's nature or trees or other things, just can't compete with this kind of, you know, stream of the sort of mediation. But again, I don't want to suggest that, like you said, you suggested that it's also opening voices and allowing people to be heard that has never been heard. And I think that is also true. You know, but these are really deep, important questions, because I think even the question of truth always goes back to like, what is truth? Who defines truth? And you know, the more fragmented we are, the more that we don't have a sense of community or common agreement, the harder that even becomes to define. And then to go back to science, the nice thing about science, right? I think this rhetoric of fake news is when you try to reduce that there is no such thing as truth. It's just opinions. It's just, you know, and science, you know, works at a different level of discovery. There is a kind of accountability and some like at least striving for something that becomes more undeniable. And yeah, just, I mean, I think we're all kind of hitting at the notes of like, this is a difficult time, and really like some of the fundamental issues of what it means to be human, what is truth, is really kind of at stake. And I think more than ever, you know, we have to put science in conversation with narrative, you know, allow that to be a part of what people engage and consume and hopefully want to talk about. You know,
you know, in this time, Karim, where we are debating truth so much, how does that affect you as a scientist and as a researcher and a professor?
Yes, so I was going to say, so I 100% agree with what you've said, Wendy and Kay, also with regards to specifically when you have kids, it makes you wonder like of the information they're being fed. It's also often a bubble because the people you follow is like an echo chamber, and so the same information circulates, and then there's like a reinforcement of your biases and so on, and things like that. But also there might be manipulation going on. You don't know who's sending what information and who's been targeting information to send out to different places across the world. So there's all these concerns, and I agree with them 100%. But on a more of a like, that's my nature, more of like an optimistic point of view, from a philosophical aspect, I'm quite actually excited about the debates that this is now triggering in terms of asking ourselves, what is reality? What is not reality? When we're talking about VR, when you can have you can spend your life with a VR headset and like be someone else, live some other experiences. Then you can take it off, and then there's this one, and you might decide the other one is actually more interesting for you. Who gets to say which is the reality? And then again, going back to the concept of the mirror, all of a sudden we say, okay, but wait, what is reality? And I think Ron mentioned this before. What are we doing here? What is life? What is existence? And so we start to go more. And this, I mean, for some people, it's going to be very scary. I'm enjoying the push more towards going back to these more fundamental existential questions that we are starting to ask ourselves right now. Why is it that I'm here, that I can have this conversation with other people now on this panel, that I'm living this life? And, you know, why is this supposed to be like, yeah, this is natural, but all these other things are sort of a bit weird, and the whole thing is weird. And so that part of it is I can understand it can be also a source of anxiety for a lot of people. But I think it can also be a sort of, at least from an epistemological and philosophical perspective, it can be also quite quite interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a great point too, because I had read, I don't know if you've ever read the literature of criticism of novels during the 18th, 19th century, but there was anxiety that kids and that when a more literate culture happened and literature became democratized, young people, women were like into reading novels, and people thought like, oh my God, that's all they want to do is read novels, and they're not. They're trying to escape into reading, and there was a real concern that was a crisis, that a whole group of people didn't want to engage the world, and instead they just wanted to fall into the world of books. Nowadays, we would think, oh my God, that's incredible. My kid is reading books. So there is that, again, kind of like new technology versus something. I think for my kids, as much as it can feel alarming, it doesn't feel, it's like their water, right? They're swimming in it, and you want them to have some self-reflection. But it is also, there are other possibilities, and they are questioning reality in a way that I never had to question, right? Because they're fundamentally addressing like different realities, and who knows what the outcome of that might be. Philosophically, it's fascinating. You're right. It's a really interesting moment.
Yes, maybe even they might be better than us at identifying fake news, and in particular propaganda, because these things have always existed. It's not new, but right now the technology allows very nice examples of it that you can see. You can say, well, this never happened, but yet there's a video of it, and so we're all alarmed of it. But I think there's been a lot of propaganda on multiple levels over the last decades. But maybe the next generation are going to be more aware of it, and they will be maybe less fooled by it than us if you could go in the other direction. Of course, they have to be, our role is probably also to sort of make sure they realize this. It's like at the beginning when Wikipedia came out, a lot of people were saying, well, now everybody's going to go to Wikipedia, and like half of it's going to be wrong, need to check. But at the end of the day, it turns out 90% of it is actually quite accurate. And then you can do your fact checking afterwards and check, but you can most reliably go use it. And the younger generations are better than the older ones at actually integrating information from sources like this, realizing some of the limits. Well, maybe I'm a bit too naive, but I think that actually works quite well.
I'm just wanting to check and see what questions we might have coming in. I don't want to miss anything. Here's an interesting one. Now, this is a big quick picture question. As tools like holograms and AI-generated realities become widespread, do you think audiences will retreat into insular worlds where they have control over narratives similar to gaming? Or what's the future of shared stories? I love the thought bubbles. We all have thought bubbles.
Well, I think there is a certain pattern, again, to go back to, I was really fascinated about print culture at a period of my life because, when you can kind of examine another era and the anxieties and how print really changed everything, right? It really restructured society, and it was an incredible revolution, the print revolution. But, prior to print, people didn't read books individually. They gathered together, and people, and only a few people could read, and often things were read out loud, and that's how churches existed. Everyone didn't have their own, and that's how different kind of forms existed. And, and then, with the rise of print, it became a much more individualized experience. And I'm sure people really missed, and I love cinema. I love gathering in the theater. I believe in it. I want it to always remain. But, even in my own life, I find myself watching movies just by myself and having profound experiences, as much as I romanticize like the theater experience, so more than ever, I'm watching films by myself, right? And so this sort of like individualized experience of media, there has been a history of that before. And maybe, I guess what does differ though is this idea that you can you can alter it and have a particular experience that's not shared at all, right? And I don't know, I don't know if that is going to go. I have no, context where I don't know if you guys do of if that will become, a dominant form of content consumption. And because I do think that at the end of the day, as humans, we want to connect with other people, right? Even if it's at a smaller level of community, that one of the best parts of art is a conversation you could have afterwards. So I don't know what that would happen if you only had an experience that you couldn't talk to anyone else about, if you loved it or disliked it.
Well, it's so interesting that this person mentioned gaming, because I did work on the narrative for a Battlefield Hardline video game, and I think gaming, people, and I've done VR film as well, and I think people don't realize that it has its own community, by the way, and it is very connected. It is worldwide connected, and for a lot of people, that is a point of real release and a gathering. There's not a fireplace, I get it, but there's gaming and there's a console, and you are interacting, for better or for worse. You are having a human experience with that technology. So I mean, I don't know, it's interesting. I think it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about how, again, the books, are they taking us away from the fire? Every time we do have some new evolution of delivery of the story system, we tend to keep growing with it, right? It doesn't, the fear of the unknown, I guess, that keeps us from not knowing. And I'll be honest, as I was listening to you, I felt like an old fogey. Of course, my daughter, Karim, is going to be smarter than me. She's only ever known a world with an iPhone. Right. For me, that's just been in the last, quarter of my life. But for her, that's been her entire life. Yeah. So she's got a whole different perspective on it. And it's probably got way better systems in place in her own mind of how to determine if something is real or not, where I'm probably way more easily duped.
But as a fellow parent, I understand it's good to be reminded. It's good to have this conversation, because I feel the same thing. It's like, oh my, but you're right. It's it's good to be reminded that of a positive side. Yeah.
From a scientific point of view, that is another really interesting debate. Like there's the ex-CEO of Google that like 2 weeks ago literally said out loud, like, if you don't have kids yet, you should probably think about waiting, because of the AI being an existential threat. And think about how surreal, like this is like taken out from a sci-fi dystopian. And he said it, right? And it's someone who's actually versed. It's not like, so I think even in the set, I'm not saying if he's wrong or right. And I think, like, what then are we as human beings if we're not, reproducing? But it's just really interesting that now it's not just like an offhand joke. Like this is, it's a whole new world, a brave new world that we're charting almost. But I think just the game video, just real quick, I think it depends. As you said, Wendy, it exists, right? There's people that live and breathe their days on Reddit or on whatever MMORPG they're excited about, and there's people that will hologram to their best friends constantly and would want to use that to connect. So it's almost like people are people and they have their choices and preferences. I think
maybe one quick thing about so the point you just mentioned, Rom, about people. So, for example, these statements that some leaders from the AI field that have, for example, chosen to leave their company and come out with these big statements. I think part of the problem is, and it applies specifically to AI, is the fact that a lot of the technology is so opaque and so inaccessible to the general public that we look to these people and say, well, if they said that and they're in the field, then probably that's the end of humanity. And the thing is, there's also diversity of opinions within, I can tell you this, within the computer science and within the AI community. Not everybody agrees with that statement of, if you're thinking of having kids, you probably should wait on, or you should stop all research in AI for 6 months while we figure out solutions or something. Because I think these are just ways, I think, of dramatically raising a red flag so that everybody gets scared and it gets headlines everywhere and people pay attention. I don't believe that many, and some of these people that actually make these statements believe them like literally that 6 months of a halt is going to like bring solutions and then we'll find a way forward and we can go back to doing AI. That's not the way these things work.
Or they're probably making money somehow off of saying that,
Of course.
For
Of
sure.
course, of course. When they say regulation is needed, and this is like it's going to be the end of humanity, we need to regulate. Obviously, they're looking at people that are going to put in money and to governments to get all scared and then pump yet more money into AI. And and then the other point I wanted to mention quickly, and I think this is what you were saying, Wendy. There's probably as human beings, we need both time where we're by ourselves and experience things by ourselves, but also times where we are also in synchrony and where we in social interaction. So if there are moments where we're using VR or video games or rather AI related experiences with other people, that's great because it's also another way of experiencing social interaction. We can be playing soccer outside, but we could also be playing a game online. And you have the mic on and people are talking to each other. Some people are actually improving their foreign language skills by doing these things. So there's a lot of things that are going on in these environments. But there are moments where, as you were saying, Kay, watching a movie by yourself is probably an equally valid and enriching experience as going to the movie and watching it with 120 other people. That's also nice. None of them is better than the other, but probably both are enjoyable in different ways and maybe enriching in different ways. So I think there's room for those two things, and it would be good for us, I think, generally to cultivate those two things. We need to have experiences by ourselves, but also we are social animals. We require that interaction with others.
Yeah.
I think that's true. I think, I was just thinking about, well, how would I spin that into a story? And I think, there's something, every story we kind of play with the idea that you start off as an orphan. What does humanity look like as an orphan with tech, where you don't have that? And then how do you go forward? It's almost like a rediscovery of who we are, again, as individuals, but then also in the collective and what role that tech plays along the way. It's all really fascinating stuff, you guys. I mean, it's a bit of a rabbit hole too, because we just don't know what we don't know, I think is sometimes how I feel about it. I hear you say what this man said about AI and that we should maybe not have kids. And I think, was he around in March 2020 when we could all kill each other by blowing on each other? I mean, excuse me? We just came out of a gigantic global pandemic. And does he not trust humanity that we can't, figure out a way to continue our existence with tech? I'm confused.
I defer to him. I just thought it's an interesting anecdote in the context, but
yeah, it is. It's very interesting. That's a power play for sure. That's a power move to come out and say something like that. I created something so powerful. You must shut it down.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think
filmmakers be able to ever say that. I've created a movie that's too good. Take it down.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think, just going back to our conversation, technology, profound technologies have always been a part of human society and civilization, whether it's language or fire. And it does seem like, obviously, and this is a great example, I don't think being naive or just being so optimistic that you're not critical and critically engaged. So obviously the attitude is not just uncritical acceptance or uncritical fear, right? I mean, I think the panels like this is really trying to encourage critical engagement, because these are very complicated questions. And it's not as if technology, Oppenheimer, is a great example that we can create technology that can destroy us. I mean, that's a reality. It's not like, oh, we'll always survive. We can destroy ourselves if we don't continue to engage in conversation, and we have people who are kind of navigating and thoughtfully engaging these issues. But it's also good to be reminded that the other side, which is uncritical fear and all the ways in which people can exploit that fear and profit from that fear, is also not the way in which we, engage it. And storytelling is a beautiful way to kind of really invite a conversation. And maybe some of the trap of storytelling is that it's much easier to just have a hero and a villain. It's much easier to present technology as a villain. That's like a way, it's much more complicated to figure out what is the structure of storytelling that can be compelling and deal with the challenges of this world, or what it means to be human, not even this world, because it's constantly been like, what does it mean to be human? Again, I think Arrival was just a great, Ram, a great reference point, because it really deals with both the future and the past, and in a way that's just really, sophisticated, but doesn't simplify any of these sort of questions that we're raising.
Yeah.
The final statement, they went to 14 studios and no one wanted to make Arrival before someone took a bet on it. So,
yeah.
And I think that shows that it's just like, those are such lofty concepts that sometimes it's hard for people that are like brick and mortar to understand. But I think that even like you should encourage us, people who think about these things, to try and make it more digestible, just for the sake of the critical argument. As you said, it's just like we should all be engaged in this. This is relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. As you were speaking, I was just thinking about the gun, the gun as the piece of technology, and what has the gun done to our world? How has it shaped our world since its invention?
Yeah.
There's a good tech story I would watch in a minute. I think we are almost out of time, but I want to just give everyone a chance to say any last words that they may have, anything else they want to share. And also thank you for coming and having this discussion. And for me, my last words about it is, I hope that more people will be interested in engaging with tech and story and putting those out into the world, and thinking about it even on, like, as we've talked about today, higher levels. It can go beyond what we thought to be a sci-fi or a tech movie in the last century. We're making this century's, and we're not, and it's like a wide open field to what that can be. So I put that out there. But any last words from anyone?
No, just grateful for all three of you. This is a great conversation, and it's sparking, thoughts, and the people who joined us as well. So thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Same. I echo the notion. I just want to say real quick that what I love so much about the Imitation Game, for example, coming to tech, right? It's about this guy who had to constantly talk in code, and he doesn't understand the world around him because he has to hide who he is, right? Like he's gay, and so that at that time, right, that was a crime. This is why he's the only person who could decipher the enigma. I think there's like these beautiful, like, sort of confluence between like tech and personality, and like we can all ask ourselves, like, what is the place of tech in our life, and how does that serve what we don't know about ourselves? And I think that is always a good place to sort of start coming up with a story.
Yeah, that's nicely put.
Yeah, I agree. I think also that we should remember that AI and all other forms of technology are just a reflection of who we are and what we produce. So at the end of the day, it's not something that we should be afraid of as being an entity of itself, because at the end of the day, this is basically a reflection of who we are. And so, and even in engaging with AI, and I hear a lot of people talking about robot rights now, or for example, the right, if you think that AI might have achieved at some point consciousness, can you switch the machine off? But in these discussions, we tend to forget that there's a lot of other obvious injustices across the planet that we need to deal with, and are probably way more important right now than just caring about whether a robot should have its rights or not. There are still a lot of wars going on, there are a lot of injustices going on, and a lot of discrimination that's happening. And I think
trans people,
exactly. So there's a lot of things that we need to tend to, and that's part of humanity. So I think that's what I think we should focus our attention on. It's one reflection and one manifestation of humanity, and what we need to care about and explore forward, maybe also in our narratives, is what it means to be human. So I think that would be my take home. And I would like to thank everybody for this amazing opportunity. I wish we could have more of these. This has been a blast. Thank you.
Yes. Thanks, everyone. I hope everyone has a great night. Thanks to everyone who came to join us. And let's get to telling our stories, and really looking forward to knowing more about your research, and wishing everyone a good night.